education of our children, like real education. The kind of education that forms lives and minds, the kind of education that we talk about when we do a baby dedication, that was always designed for godly parents. Wherever you decide that your kids are going to learn math, make sure they learn how to pray from you. Wherever your kids are going to learn phonics, let them learn how to follow Jesus from you. Wherever your kids learn about the things of the world, let them learn how God designs, sustains, and holds the world from you. Because this world, not just the schools, not the system, not the establishment, no, the world and the spirit of Babylon is seeking to rewire your child. So parents, we've got to hold fast. But listen, we can't fight off the rewiring of our children if we're falling for it too. I am so excited to study the book of Daniel together for many reasons. Not the least of which is there are stories in the book of Daniel that were, for a lot of us, some early memories that we learned about. It certainly is the case for me. But hopefully what that little video showed you there is that there's a little bit more going on behind the scenes than maybe we remember. A little more going on than we remember from the VeggieTales episode or the Kids Bible. And I'm looking forward to diving into this in a special way. It's a story of exile, servitude, captivity, a land of darkness that promised a false light and yet sought to blot out everything that was actually held dear, to eerily strip away a nation's identity and replace it and reform the people of God into a people of their world. So how do you continue on? What do you do? How do you live in the home away from home? So go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Daniel chapter 1. If you want to put a note, or a title at the top of your notes, today's message is called Home Sweet Babylon. Home Sweet Babylon. As we completed our Get Wise series a couple of weeks ago through Proverbs chapters 1 through 9, we spent some time in the last teaching of that, kind of connecting the dots between King Solomon down the 400 years or so to where we start the book of Daniel. So if you missed that teaching, I'd encourage you, go back and watch the last teaching of Get Wise, and it'll fill in a little bit more of the historical data. But to show us where we are in the Bible as we start this new book, it's a time when the kingdom of Israel had long been split into two kingdoms. There was the northern kingdom, and then there was the southern kingdom, also known as Judah. Now, at this point in history, the northern kingdom is basically no more, and that's a story for another time. But the southern kingdom, with its capital city of Jerusalem, was still hanging on, though they had fallen into great disobedience, and their time of reckoning was at hand. Now, the book of Daniel covers about 70 years of history. So when we studied the book of John, that was roughly about 3-year timeline. When we looked at the book of Jonah, we were talking like 6 months timeline. Now we've got 70 years in this book. It's going to give us the rise and fall of multiple kingdoms and rulers. And it's also going to tell us about future kingdoms as well. And that's one of the truly fascinating things about the book of Daniel. It is a part history of what happened and part prophecy of what is to come. So God has a lot to tell us in this book, a lot to tell us in this series about how we can learn from the past, how we can be prepared for the future, and how we can now live in the present. So let's just dive into the book. Daniel chapter 1, we'll start in verse 1, of course. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God. And he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. So we find out in these first few verses that Daniel, writing this much later in life, he gives us the setting and the situation of how the book opens. He says it's in the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim in Judah. So that gives us an exact date as to the start of this book. This would be in 597 BC. That's where this opens. Jehoiakim was not much of a king. He was a weak king. In fact, he would have been installed as king of Judah in kind of a puppet manner 3 years earlier by the Pharaoh in Egypt after Egypt had defeated Judah in battle. But now 3 years has passed, and there's a new superpower on the geopolitical scene, Babylon. And Babylon now defeats Egypt. Jehoiakim looks on and says, okay, I'm going to do the smart, if not weak, thing, and we're going to pledge our fealty, we're going to pledge our allegiance to Babylon and their king, Nebuchadnezzar. Now, a little later on, Jehoiakim gets too big for his britches and he rebels. And so these opening verses of the book of Daniel, we're reading of the consequences of that rebellion. Nebuchadnezzar comes and besieges the city of Jerusalem. And Daniel points out that it wasn't Babylon's superior fighting power that brought their victory. God's never been afraid of long odds. It was God's sovereignty that brought the defeat to Judah that had been a long time coming. But even though this happened under the sovereignty of God, it doesn't mean that what Babylon was doing or would continue to do was a good thing. Nebuchadnezzar brings back these precious articles from the temple as spoils of war. And these things designed for the worship of Yahweh, he puts them as a dedication to his false gods instead. But that's not all he's going to bring back from Jerusalem. And there are plenty of bad guys in the Bible. So we read the Old Testament, different nations rise up as bad guy nations, and they do different things to attack the good guys. So we think of the book of Exodus, and we've got the Egyptians, and what they did is they made slaves of the people. That's how that was their MO. Let's look at another book. The book of Jonah, a couple months ago now. The book of Jonah. Anyone remember who the bad guys were in the book of Jonah? The Assyrians, very good. Nineveh being the capital city of Assyria. Well, the Assyrians didn't make people slaves. They made people dead. They made people hurt. They made people into wallpaper, if you remember, right? So Egyptians made people slaves. The Assyrians made people dead, not Babylon. Babylon made people into Babylonians. That's how they did it. Let's see how. Verse 3. Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel and some of the king's descendants and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and literature of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them. So at the end of that time, they might serve before the king. So Babylon not only takes the temple articles, but also the best and the brightest. They take the young men of nobility, oftentimes part of the royal family. These would be teenage boys, about 15 to 19 years old. But again, they aren't taken as like just a workforce like the Egyptians, and they aren't taken to be killed like the Assyrians did, but they are taken to be turned into Babylonians. So how are they going to do that? How are they going to turn these good Jewish boys, these God-fearing Jews, into Babylonians? Well, they're going to have to basically brainwash them. They're going to have to reprogram them, if you will. And how they go about it is actually kind of genius. In the verses we just read, we read 3 ways. There's 4 ways we're going to read in this passage. There's 3 ways we just read on how they do it. So we're going to kind of go back into those verses again, and we're going to look now at how the Babylonians set out to do this. So the first way, and we'll put this on the screen, this is point number 1. The first way is they relegated them. Babylon relegated these young men. They weren't taken as a workforce or slave labor or anything, but they were relegated to being members of a system, just as cogs in a machine. They had their place, and they knew their place. And they had expectations to get along and keep the status quo. These young men were put under the charge of an overseer, Ashpenaz, the chief of the eunuchs. In fact, this very thing is the fulfillment of prophecy. We're already reading about prophecy fulfilled here. So let's pause the book of Daniel for a moment, and we're going to rewind the clock of time about 100 years or so. And it was a time, really one of the few times since King Solomon, that a good king was on the throne of Judah. There's a guy by the name of Hezekiah. Hezekiah was a good king, followed the Lord, but listen, even good kings make bad choices. And Hezekiah had been very sick, but the Lord brought him back to health. It's a wonderful thing. And so he's feeling pretty good about himself. Well, an envoy is sent from another nation with a gift for him, like a "we're glad you're feeling better" gift. And that envoy is from the nation of Babylon. Now, this was 100 years earlier. They weren't the superpower then. In fact, they were sent with this gift and this envoy to congratulate him because they both had a common enemy. Their common enemy was the Assyrians. So it's like, all right, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Hey, let's be buddies. And when Hezekiah received this envoy, instead of saying, "Hey, thanks so much, praise be to the God of our fathers for making me well," and send them on their way, instead, he wants to impress them. And so he takes this envoy on a tour of the kingdom. And he shows off everything. He shows all the wealth of the land. He shows what God has given them. He shows them the palace. He shows them the temple with all the gold and the bronze elements and all the great riches of Judah. He shows off to all of them. He acted in pride by seeking the approval of men, even evil men. Well, just about this time, the prophet Isaiah rolls into town. And he says, "Hezekiah, king, what did you show the Babylonians?" He goes, "Oh man, everything. I showed them the temple, I showed them the palace, I showed them all this stuff. They're going to be really impressed with me. I mean us, I mean God." And then we read the following thing in Isaiah 39. We'll put it on the screen for you can follow along. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, "Hear the word of the Lord of hosts. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house and what your fathers have accumulated until this day shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says the Lord, and they shall take away some of your sons who will descend from you, whom you will beget, and they shall be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon." So in the book of Daniel, over 100 years later, we are now seeing this prophecy fulfilled. And that begs kind of an uncomfortable question. Does this mean that Daniel and these other young men were made eunuchs, like by castration? That wasn't in the VeggieTales episode. Well, it's very possible that they were. It's very possible that part of the Babylonian plan was to remove their sexual identity and reduce the testosterone in these young teenage men to kind of relegate them to this place and this life of a eunuch. Now, I say possibly because in Hebrew, the word for eunuch that we read is the word saris. And saris means eunuch, and most of the time it does mean a castrated male. It can also refer to basically someone who's just part of a government system, which we know they were. Scholars debate, some feel very strongly that they were in fact made physical eunuchs. But either way, they were relegated. They were told their place. Here's how you fit into this system. Stay inside the lines, go along and get along. So first, they were relegated. Secondly, they were rewired. They were rewired, number two. We read that these teenagers were going to be taught the language and literature of the Chaldeans. That was the culture of Babylon. They were going to be completely immersed in this culture. And we read that this training was going to be taking place for 3 years straight. Now, this certainly isn't the last time something like this would happen in history. In the 1930s in Germany, the Nazi Party looked on and they realized the importance of the young people of the nation. And so they started a program called the Hitlerjugend, or the HJs. We in English, we call it the Hitler Youth. And this was a program designed for teenage boys ages 14 to 18. And the goal of it was pretty simple. They were taught what the Nazi Party wanted them to believe. They were immersed in the culture and the literature of Nazism and Aryanism to rewire their brains and behavior to make the people of Germany into Nazis. Well, 2,500 years earlier, the Babylonians were doing the same thing. Taking young men, rewiring them by immersing them in and teaching them the language and culture and literature of Babylon. So they were relegated, they were rewired. Number 3, they were rewarded. They were rewarded. This is a sneaky one, and it's a powerful one. Put yourself in the place of these young men for a moment. Taken away from your homes, from your family, from everything you know, everything you hold dear, and marched to a foreign place across the desert. Babylon was in what is in modern day Iraq. And many people think that for them to have gone from Jerusalem to Babylon, that would have been a journey on foot of about 4 months through the desert. But what was waiting for them on the other side of that 4 months? Have you ever heard of the 7 wonders of the world? This list was first put together in 1572, and only one of these ancient wonders we can still see today. The pyramid at Giza made the list. The rest of the 6 have been lost to history. But one of these 7 ancient wonders is something called the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Here's an artist's rendition of what this may have looked like. So picture the middle of the desert, middle of Iraq, and out of the city rises this giant ziggurat with waterfalls and hanging plants and lush, beautiful gardens. So these young men travel 4 months through the desert, and then they find themselves entering into a city that is so breathtaking in its beauty that it becomes known around the world. And so they enter into this jaw-dropping paradise in the middle of the desert. But then, once they get there, they're actually treated really well. Right? They get to live in the king's palace. Not bad. The food they're given is second to none. They actually were given the kingly portion, meaning the choicest meats and the finest wine. It's said that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. And judging by the grocery bills at my house, that is certainly true of teenage boys. So you're just giving a bunch of teenagers this beautiful place to live, all the wine they can drink, and the best food ever. They're rewarding them. It's a life. Yes, they're taken away from what they knew. There's exile, there's captivity, but it's also a life of comfort and reward. The Babylonian way of making Babylonians was not by way of destruction, but of seduction. So the propaganda arm of Babylon had an ingenious plan to relegate them, to just kind of know their place in the machine, to rewire their thinking and their culture, and to reward them with comfortable living. But there was also a 4th way that they would make these Jewish boys into Babylonians as well. Let's read about it in verse 6. Now from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. To them, the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah, Shadrach, to Mishael, Meshach, and to Azariah, Abednego. We finally meet our title character and some of his buddies here. These are sons of Judah, noble, blooded Jewish men, but Babylon wanted to erase that. So they employ method number 4. Point number 4, they were renamed. They were renamed because names matter. Names have meaning. The name Daniel, that meant something to him. Do we have any Daniels in the room? Real quick, anybody named Daniel? Any Dans in the house? There's nobody named Daniel at this church. This is the third gathering in a row that no one has raised their hand. This is amazing. Well, the next time you meet a Daniel, you can tell him how cool his name is in Hebrew. Because the name Daniel in Hebrew means, the Lord is my judge. And so every time Daniel heard his name, he was reminded of who he was and who his God was. Well, this flew in the face of what the Babylonians wanted, so they needed to change that. And so they renamed him Belteshazzar, which means Bel's prince. Bel was a false deity, a false god that the Babylonians worshiped. So this new name was divorced from the God of Israel to point him to a new pagan identity. And one of Daniel's friends. Well, the name Hananiah means beloved by the Lord. His name was changed to Shadrach, which means illuminated by the sun god. The name Mishael asks a powerful rhetorical question. Who is like God? Mishael's name was changed to Meshach, which means who is like Aku. Aku is another false god. The name Azariah means the Lord is my help. His name was changed to Ebed-Nego, which means servant of Nego. You guessed it, another false god. And with these changes, Babylon took aim at their identity in the God of their fathers, calling them by new names to reorient them and attempt to change even how they saw themselves. So the 3-year process began. Relegating, rewiring, rewarding, and renaming, all designed to not just make them men in Babylon, but men of Babylon. And listen, as believers in Jesus, as people who are called to follow the same God that these young men were called to follow, we need to realize something today. The same sort of things are still happening today. There are places in the world where if you are a follower of Jesus, you will be enslaved, like the ancient Egyptians did. There are places today in the world where if you are a follower of Jesus, you will be murdered, like the ancient Assyrians did. But don't worry, not in America, not in the West. No, in the West, Babylon is still making Babylonians. And we need to have our eyes open to this today. Now, before we go on, we really need to define our terms. Because when we start talking about the power of culture and of our world and how it seeks to turn us into disciples of itself, people are really quick to throw around the word they. This group, that group, those people, they're after you, they're after your kids, they're trying to do this or that. So when we're talking about this, that the same thing that was happening in Daniel chapter 1 is happening today, who or what are we talking about? Because when we're talking about Babylon and we're reading the text, we could say, oh, well, it was Nebuchadnezzar or it was Ashpenaz. And to a degree, yes, but really what we're talking about is Babylon itself was doing this. And listen, in the Bible, Babylon is given as a picture to us. Yes, it was a real place, but God also uses this as an incredible picture. It is a picture of idolatry, of greed, and it is a picture of the systems of the world. Babylon, the spirit of Babylon, is a spirit that is counterfeit to all things Jesus. And this spirit of Babylon is alive and well today. So as we proceed, I want you to know that we're not talking about a group of people with a different ideological or political view than us. We are talking about the world itself, the spirit of the age, and how it seeks to seduce us. Yes, the old hymn is true. This is our Father's world. But the Bible also tells us that Satan has been allowed some temporary sway over the world today. Jesus is the King of Kings, but Ephesians tells us that Satan is called the prince of the power of the air for now. And the evil one seeks to do the same thing to us today through the spirit of Babylon that he did to these young men 2,600 years ago. And Satan and the world attempt to use the same methods. There's no new pages in the playbook. We just need to learn to recognize these things. Just like Babylon, the world seeks to relegate us. Just keep us quiet, kind of fit into the society. Yeah, you can go to church on Sunday if you want. That's fine. Just kind of keep it there. Keep it quiet. Don't proselytize. Don't talk to people about it. You can do your little gathering thing, but just kind of go with the flow in society. That's still what the expectations are in the world. And it's been interesting to me that as we look at our world today, the world also seems to seek to remove gender norms as well. Perhaps just like Babylon did by potentially castrating these young men. Interestingly enough, I was writing this message and I was studying in this section right here, and I told you we were away for a pastor's conference. And so the night before the conference, my wife and I went and stayed at a hotel in Atlanta, and I was sitting kind of in this rooftop area. And as I'm studying and writing this section, I look up because I see movement, and someone sits at the table right in front of me. It was a person that was clearly born a man, created by God as a male, but who was dressed as and presented themselves as a woman. And the world applauds this. The world seeks to relegate us and reform us and remove us from how God created us. And so as I see this person, my response was not anger or disgust. My response was heartbreak. As I watched this young man created in the image of God being so confused and so lied to because they had been relegated to a pronoun of how they were supposed to fit into the world around them. Relegating is still happening. And it seems to be happening in the exact same way they were doing it in Babylon. And just like Babylon, the world also seeks to rewire us, to keep us saturated in the culture of the spirit of Babylon. Entertainment, information and news, most of which isn't even true, but just kind of slanted one way or another to support a point of view in order to continually rewire our way of thinking. Now, some at this point might start to get real adamant about education. And I too am adamant about education, but maybe in a different way than you think. But for a moment, let me give you the backstory of my family and how we're raising our kids. We've had seasons in our family where our kids have been homeschooled. We've had seasons where they've done co-ops. We've had seasons where they've done private Christian education. And we're now in a season as a family where all 7 of our children are in the public school system. And listen, what you choose to do with your family for the education of your children, that is a matter that is between you and the Lord. And I pray that whatever you're doing, you're praying about it. For this year, this semester, this season, God, what would you have for our family at this time? But listen, here's the thing. Here's where I'm going to be adamant. Education of our children, like real education. The kind of education that forms lives and minds. The kind of education that we talk about when we do a baby dedication. That was always designed for godly parents. Wherever you decide that your kids are going to learn math, make sure they learn how to pray from you. Wherever your kids are going to learn phonics, let them learn how to follow Jesus from you. Wherever your kids learn about the things of the world, let them learn how God designs, sustains, and holds the world from you. Because this world, not just the schools, not the system, not the establishment, no, the world and the spirit of Babylon is seeking to rewire your child. So parents, we've got to hold fast. But listen, we can't fight off the rewiring of our children if we're falling for it too. if we allow ourselves to just give ourselves over completely to the anger and polarization of news and politics, if we lose ourselves in the drama and self-indulgence of a social media culture, if we just swallow what entertainment tells us is the norm, then we're allowing ourselves to be rewired as well. And church, this is happening today perhaps like never before. And so many of us aren't even realizing it's happening. We're laughing at things that we were created to be heartbroken by. We're accepting things as normal that the Lord said, do you not realize the destruction that is causing in your life and others? It's the rewiring of our thinking, of our feelings, of our very outlook on life. It is still an active tool of the enemy. But I dare say that nowhere more do we see the spirit of Babylon than in the third method, rewarding. Perhaps the most effective tactic of Babylon with these young men was to offer them comfort. Turn them into docile, submissive young guys. Beautiful views of the gardens, good food, easy life. The fact is, whatever your socioeconomic situation is, just by living in America, we live in some degree of comfort. I know those degrees vary, but listen, we got the internet, Netflix, food aplenty, got our phones to distract us, video games to veg out to, our homes to stay cool or warm in, and the comfort, listen, the comfort so often keeps us from remembering who we were before. Before Babylon, the comfort makes us feel like we are home. And that's exactly what Babylon wanted to tell these young men. Now, comfort can be a beautiful thing. After all, the invitation of Jesus is to abide in him, to enter rest in him. Come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest. And we're led into green pastures and we sit at the table. Yes, that's restful, that's wonderful. But listen, the comfort of the world, it is a counterfeit. It's not designed to bring us rest, but to make us docile and to distract us from the greater calling of following our God. And it is working. It is working. We are seeing a docile church in the West today. Beware, Babylon still rewards its captives. But the world, and Satan as its prince, seems to save the most dastardly method for the people of God. The world and the spirit of Babylon sets its sights on believers in Jesus and seeks to rename us. Now, this happens subtly at first, in a way that maybe we don't even realize. See, the world is a really good label maker. And subtly, it seems to hand us a blank label and gives us the marker and says, hey, write whatever you want on the name tag. Just start putting the labels on yourself. You get to choose. Oh, that's freedom. But here's the thing. What the world is doing is it's trying to turn our interests or our inclinations into identities. I mean, there's little simple ways we see this. Like you don't like football. You're Vols Nation. You're a Vols fan. It's who you are. You don't like pop music. You're a Swiftie. And we call Taylor mother because it's who we are. You're not in your 30s. No, you are a millennial. You don't hold to a specific set of political viewpoints. No, you are a Republican, a Democrat, a conservative, a liberal. You're like, well, what's the big deal with the labels? Listen. It's because the world, the spirit of the age, is seeking to start putting these stickers on us that we seemingly are writing ourselves. And as these labels start to pile up, each statement is an attempt to drown out what God has named you so we can't hear it over the noise of all the other labels. So what has God named you? What is the name of your home country, heaven? Well, for every person in this room, believer or unbeliever, God has given you the name image bearer. In the book of Genesis, we've been reading it on our reading plan here at the house. We read right at the beginning, God said, let us create man in our image. Every person was created in the image of the Creator. You are an image bearer. And if you've been saved by faith through Jesus, then he has another name for you. He calls you child. He calls you son. He calls you daughter. And not only that, he says, hey, yeah, you're part of the family, but guess what? You are a co-heir with my only begotten son. You have full favor and recognition. He also names us chosen. He says, before I formed you, I knew you. And yes, there was a time when we came to him and said, Lord, I need you. I'm reaching out to you. Save me. And he says, yes, I will save you. And I want you to know I've chosen you from before the foundations of the world. He tells us this. He names us never forsaken. I will never leave you or forsake you. He who comes to me, I will in no wise cast out. Those are the names of our home country. But listen, aside from just trying to quiet those names by adding the labels over the top of them, the enemy of our souls also seeks, just like Babylon did, just like Ashpenaz did, to call us by different names in order to forget our home country. God named you image bearer. The enemy comes alongside and says, no, you're worthless. You don't matter. There's nothing special about you. God names you child. The enemy sidles up and says, yeah, but you're a disappointment. Right? I mean, you think about how your earthly parents screwed up. Imagine, you can't imagine the Heavenly Father's any better. Yeah, all these other people, God's happy with them, but not you. You're a disappointment. You're not doing enough. God names you chosen. The enemy says, you're unwanted. God calls you never forsaken. The enemy tells you, nah, you're forgotten. If he really cared about you, wouldn't this have gone differently? Do you see how that is? It flies in the face of the name we've been given, a new name that has a lie and a hook in it. Just like Babylon, the enemy seeks to take the names we were given by God and twist them so that we would forget our true identity and our heavenly home. So the world seeks to relegate us, to rewire us, to reward us, and rename us. And the aim of the world, the aim of the enemy, the aim of the spirit of Babylon is still the same today as it was in the book of Daniel. The goal is to convince us that right now we're home. That this is our home, that we are people of the world. We belong here. Child of God, you need to know you are not home. The Bible says we're to be in the world, but we are not of the world. This is a temporary dwelling place, so we can't get too comfortable. So maybe now we have our eyes open to this. Maybe now we can see a little bit of the spirit of the age and what it's doing to us. What do we do now? How do we combat this spirit, these voices, this power? Well, we'll see you next week as we continue to learn from Daniel and his friends how we can truly live in this home away from home. Amen? Let's pray.
Hey everybody, Pastor Brian here. Thanks so much for checking out this teaching from the house. Look, if something stood out to you, ministered to you, or maybe you could use some prayer or have some more questions about Jesus, drop us a line. info@thehousechat.com. That's chat with 2 T's. Now, if you want to support the ministry God is doing here at the house, or just get a whole bunch more information on who we are as a church, you can head to thehousechat.com. Have a great week.